WWE 2K25 Universe Mode lets you set up great singles and tag team rivalries, but it lacks great faction booking and gameplay. So today, I'm going to show you all the secrets and hidden options to create and book great factions within your Universe Mode. Make sure to like and subscribe and check out all my other Universe Mode content. First, we're going to talk about how to book factions, and then later we'll talk about how to create your own factions for your WWE 2K25 Universe Mode. So when you go to book factions, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what motivates them? What is their purpose? Is it titles? What divisions are they in going to dominate? What's their end goal? You need to know that purpose. Think about the Shield. At first, it really wasn't about their own titles, gaining titles. It was about justice. They felt that CM Punk should be champion, so they held him out for a bit. And they really didn't want corporate to be affecting anything else, making changes that weren't just. Now think about Seth Rollins and his new faction. They're supposed to be the future of wrestling. That's their purpose. Seth Rollins, he wants a world title. And then you think about what does like Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed want? Do they want to dominate the tag division because they're the future? Do they want the mid-card titles? So when you're booking these factions, their booking needs to align with their purpose. If they're chasing titles, they should go after the top superstars who are chasing those same titles, while also making their presence known to the current champions. Think about Seth Rollins' new group targeting Jay, but also feuding with CM Punk and Sami Zayn, who are competing for a title shot in the King of the Ring. By focusing mainly on the competition at first, it will give this new group legitimacy with each big win in the divisions that they're focusing on, which then that would further their storyline of them coming for titles. Another great way to book factions is with faction wars. Think about how the Bloodline fought the Brawling Brutes with Kevin Owens and Drew McIntyre at War Games, and I think was it 2022? Put aside KO and Drew for just a second so we can focus on the factions themselves. The build up to this match with just the factions, with the Bloodline injuring Sheamus and also having the tag title feud with the Brawling Brutes, using these months of feuds by each part of the faction against each other, it really built for that massive payoff at the War Games match. So think about how main eventers, mid-carders, and tag teams for both men and women within your factions can continue to push a longer story for the faction supremacy angle. This big payoff with a winning faction can then push them to title opportunities. But also, with the losing faction, maybe now you see some friction and even a breakup possibly. That gives you even more stories to tell. How would you go about setting up these ways to book factions within your Universe Mode without there being any specific faction rivalry actions? It's actually not very difficult, but it does take a little bit of creativity for it to all kind of make sense and flow together correctly. So within Universe Mode, you have the 1v1 and 2v2 rivalry actions, and they can still give you the ability to create some great storylines for your factions, and there are a number of great ways to use them to start a new rivalry for your factions. If a faction member sees another contender aiming for the same title that they want, you can use a distraction rivalry action as the starting point to force that other superstar's eyes away from the champion that they're focused on. You can then continue with the distractions, like the manager distraction, for an example, to help incorporate more of your faction into the storyline besides your main faction superstar, and this will then help further the rivalry a bit, or you can take it in a totally different direction. Ambush and brawl rivalry actions can be a great way to move a faction rivalry further along, especially when you're getting close to a PLE, as it'll help increase the tension with attacks rather than little distraction actions. In real life WWE, we see a lot of factions using the numbers game to help beat up on the opposition, whether it be during a match, end of a match, a promo, etc. Think about the Judgment Day, think about the Bloodline. They really use that numbers game to hold dominance in championships for a long time. So unfortunately, there's not really a great way to do this in Universe Mode right now, between rivalry actions and just how it all works. But there can be a little bit of a workaround. To try and mimic this, you can actually use the Backstage Brawl match as a way to set up a 2v1 Backstage Brawl match, and that allows your faction to use the numbers game to attack a different superstar backstage. And this could be a great way to set up the end of your go-home show, as the faction would then have the last laugh and have all the momentum going into a big PLE match. What's interesting with the backstage brawls is they can actually be a great way to start a rivalry too, instead of close one out before the PLE. Rather than, your typical distraction that I talked about and how I see really most people use to start pretty much every rivalry for the most part, This is a great option for a more ruthless faction, as it can be a great way to change the pace of how most rivalries start, as it allows the faction to make a statement with that first attack, but also making it feel like the attack and the start of this new feud that's occurring came out of nowhere because there was no prior interactions. I feel like this is an explosive and exciting start that shouldn't be used very often to start a faction rivalry, as it would lose its uniqueness and excitement if it's done, too much. To make sure you follow a backstage brawl starting point for a feud, you should immediately use the ambush actions and the rivalry actions, like the post-match kendo stick attack or the post-match wild attack as a couple of examples, to help continue to show the ruthlessness of your faction throughout this feud. One thing that I feel people really miss when having faction rivalries with other superstars is that they mainly focus on the factions having rivalry actions, but not on the other superstars in this feud getting the upper hand with rivalry actions. So a great way for a faction's opposition to get the upper hand is by using the ringside guest removal option from the distraction section of rivalry actions. Another way is to set up a 1v1 backstage brawl where you have the faction's opposition get revenge with an attack on a faction member. A third way that I like to have the opposition push back at a faction is through the pre-match revenge attack option in the attack section of rivalry actions. These are three great ways, honestly, that allow the opposition to get the upper hand, get their own attacks in, revenge, all that kind of thing, in three totally different ways, as it adds a lot more variety to how the opposition could attack factions within these feuds, and really that helps make each rivalry feel different if you really mix it up with each feud. Now, to come back to more of the faction versus faction stuff I talked about a few minutes ago with the Wargames stuff, if you're doing a faction versus faction rivalry heading into Wargames, it becomes a little bit different when you're really booking that build, but it's really not much harder to do and not really very difficult. You really want to do something similar to how I discussed a couple minutes ago about the similarities between starting rivalry with the backstage brawl and then turning it into attacks and ambushes as a way to show ruthlessness. That's kind of how you really want to start and build this rivalry for Wargames, because it's, a huge gimmick match where two steel cages, right? So it's a ruthless match, so you want a ruthless build. But one way I would change this kind of build is I would add in the post-match steel cage fight option from the attack section of the rivalry actions. And I'd want to use this more on the go-home show as a way to kind of mimic the Wargames gimmick at the end. I know obviously this is only one cage versus Wargames being two, so it's pretty different obviously, but the feel is nearly the same. And it could be a great way to end your final go-home show as you head into the Wargames PLE for a faction versus faction rivalry end. Now that we've talked about how to book factions and rivalries with other superstars, what about booking the end of a faction? So for this, you want to take a look at some key points. One being, factions will usually last like 2 to 3 years typically. So that's how long you want to run your factions for the most part before it's time to put it to rest. Also ends with some type of fallout. Think about maybe a betrayal by members like the Judgment Day on Rhea Ripley or Damian Priest. Maybe it's not the total end of a faction, but you're evolving the faction, which in this case, Evolution, kicking out Randy Orton, I think really evolved that story in that faction. And then think about how Seth Rollins betrayed the Shield and ended that faction. So these betrayals, whether it's ending a faction or kicking someone out and evolving it, it leads to a big payoff, whether it be a huge match right after, or a long road of matches and brawls and face-offs before the big final match. So the end of faction should typically set it up so one or two superstars come away with a big future push, as they are the focus of the end of this faction. Usually one's a face and one's a heel, but it really depends on how the faction ends. The remaining members that aren't involved with a push are usually written off TV for a little bit in a lot of cases, sometimes not. It really depends on their star power. Typically, they might even be repackaged into a different character, while the main superstars who are involved in that big end payoff, they usually have their characters evolve into kind of a next chapter, and they really keep similar packaging, but in some rare cases, like maybe the Shield, once again bring them up, their look was so unique with the Shield concept that even if Seth Rollins was the main character, he still got a good repackage. So you gotta think about what the final send-off and breakup means for how your characters evolve. Repackaging them to a new gimmick, just repackaging their look, is nothing gonna change? You don't really think about that. And when it comes to booking the exact matches and rivalry actions, with a betrayal, there's obviously the Fallout rivalry actions, you can use those. You can also use the ambush, attack, and brawl options as a way to have that payoff of the turn. Really, I don't have a great way of telling you how to book it because it's all should be story related to you. So really, attacks, brawls, and ambushes are your best bet to have that turn. Now let's talk about how to create factions for your own universe mode. You want to start with the why. Why are these superstars coming together? Is it because they have no direction at this point? Do they have a similar goal? Or do you just want something to shake up your universe mode with a huge fresh storyline? Think about Seth Rollins adding Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed and Paul Heyman out of nowhere. It was just a huge shakeup. And that really comes back to your purpose, because if they have a similar goal, like chasing titles, then obviously you can have your main member win the world title or go after the world title. A mid-carder maybe go after a mid-card title. If it's tag teams involved, go after the tag titles, that kind of thing. Or is it like a justice group like the Shield, where maybe the titles aren't necessarily the focus at first? They're just focused on getting justice for the company or how they feel justice should be in the company, before eventually maybe they think justice is them being champions and going after titles. So think about that when you're choosing the superstars. Does it make sense for why they're coming together? Then think about their roles. So obviously roles are like, I'm talking main eventers, mid-carders, tag teams for both men and women, and managers. Do you have a fitting amount of maybe each? Not all factions are built the same. You could have multiple single stars, one single stars and tags. You just want a good mix of different superstars, main eventers, up-and-comers who are mid-carders, tag teams. Everything should flow and make sense so no one's stepping on each other's toes within your faction. But maybe eventually they evolve to stepping on each other's toes, similar to, Finn Balor, Damian Priest, Finn Balor, Dominic Mysterio, that kind of thing. Then focus on personalities. Everyone's personality shouldn't be the same. What was great, I think, right now, or I guess not anymore, with Judgment Day was you had a lot of personalities. You had leaders, you had Rhea Ripley before and Damian Priest who were kind of leaders. You kind of had cowards like Finn Balor, and you had the comedic characters, and Carlito, sadly no longer here, but Dominic Mysterio is kind of comedic in some ways. So you want a good mix of personalities. It shouldn't all be the same. And that goes for their look too. I think color schemes and kind of schematically their look should be similar, but they should have their own personality in their look as well. Think about the Judgment Day, I guess, as well. Their looks were similar. They had the black and purple kind of scheme, but they also kind of had their own gear and looks that made them unique. So similar color schemes, similar vibes, but still different and unique. And with that, that's how I really book and create factions to make sense of my universe mode. If you have any other tips that maybe I didn't mention here, drop them in the comments below. If you disagree with anything, drop it in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.